Tēnā koutou tūlawhalawa. Hello, my name is John Bradbury and I work in the People Experience practice here at the MA. For the next hour, we're going to have a conversation about bullying, harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and look at some of the research that there is in New Zealand about the costs of this, both at a personal level and at an organisational level. And we're also going to look at what organisations and individuals can do in order to make their workplaces free of bullying and harassment. To do that, what we will have is a conversation with our three guests and that are joining us today online, and also another guest in the studio. So there will be lots of conversation from different points of view, lots of research to hear. And if you have questions that you want to ask in relation to that, we do have a hashtag bullying on slido.com, and you can go to that and raise your questions, and we will do our best to get through the most critical questions that are raised on that, and get to hear from some experts around what are the best answers. So I'd like to now just introduce my first guest, or our first guest, and that is Karina, who is the Human Rights Commissioner. And I'd just like each of our guests in turn to introduce themselves. So Karina, would you like to join us and talk about what your recent research on bullying and introduce yourself? Thank you. Good to see you.
Tēnā koutou. Inga mana, inga reo, raurangatira mā, whalawa, tēnā koutou. Thank you very much for inviting me on, John and your team, and also greetings to my fellow panelists. So I'll provide as briefly as I can just an overall picture of what the research showed us. And this is a piece of research that was conducted between May and June earlier this year. And it had a sample of just over 2,500 workers that included people who worked for families, volunteers, contract workers, as well as salary and wage earners. And we wanted to identify, you know, are there any particular groups that may be more vulnerable to such behaviors, such victimization through acts of bullying, racial harassment, and sexual harassment. And also we wanted some idea in terms of the prevalence, not over a lifetime, because we've seen studies about heavy experiences over a lifetime, because we didn't think that that was very helpful. So we looked at it in terms of having experienced such behaviors over the last 5 years. And we also wanted to understand the short-term and the long-term impacts on workers. And we're all interested in that. You know, we want our people to be productive, to turn up, to love their work, et cetera, et cetera. And we do want to retain the talent that we invested in bringing in. So these are really important questions. And then also we wanted to understand, were there any struggles for workers if something did happen, how, you know, what was their experience, and, you know, what can be done better. So that's an overall sort of show, sort of demonstration of the goal of the study. And we did apply a human rights lens. You know we all have fundamental rights under the International Convention of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, to work, to be safe in your work, to be free of discrimination, to just and favorable conditions, and so forth. So it is very much grounded in that. So in terms of sexual harassment, what the research showed is that about 30% of all workers experience some form of sexual harassment in the last 5 years. Certainly, if we look at that in terms of gender, 54% of women aged between 18 and 29 reported having experienced some form of sexual harassment. In terms of sexual orientation, bisexual workers, 67% of bisexual workers, those who identified as such, had experienced this form of harassment. In terms of our disabled workforce, 58%, a huge amount, had experienced some form of sexual harassment. So, you know, not very good figures. But the interesting figure for us to note, and I want our audience to know, that 23% is a bystander figure for sexual harassment. That means that 1 in 5, at least, in the workforce were witnessing or had been aware that this was happening to someone. So that gives us some hope. Now, if I turn to racial harassment, 39% of all workers had suffered some form of racial harassment in the workplace in the last 5 years. If we look at ethnic groups, Pacific people, 62%. Same with our Asian brothers and sisters, 62% had experienced some form of racial harassment in the last 5 years. In terms of industries, the prevalence appeared to be highest in the healthcare sector, transport, media, and telecommunications. So we also took an industry cut to that. In terms of bullying, there was a general 20% prevalence of people that experienced bullying. Again, our young workers, especially our young workers in the hospitality sector, quite significant numbers had experienced bullying in the hospitality sector. In fact, that appears to be the most high-risk industry for young people in terms of bullying and sexual harassment. Again, with our disabled workers, 52% had reported significant experience of bullying. Pacific workers, above all other workers in ethnicity, reported a high experience of bullying. In terms of perpetrators, around 70% of perpetrators were someone of a more senior role to them. So clearly we have the power imbalance. Anything from a more senior colleague to managers to directors and so forth. In terms of the genders of the perpetrators, around 72% of perpetrators were male, but there were also female perpetrators, especially in terms of bullying. So that's a sort of a quick run over in terms of the stats. The impact, of course, we know it impacts productivity, impacts our sense of dignity and belonging and so forth. And while some are able to overcome the experience, perhaps address it, the majority did not seek formal remedy, if I can put it that way. The most common first point of call for refuge is to a colleague or to family members. But certainly in terms of taking any matters beyond that, I've got here about 24% of workers had looked internally. So only about a quarter looked internally in terms of the policies that our businesses have. A lot of them don't take it any further. And in terms of how many of the complaints make it further out to places like the Human Rights Commission or MB, only about 1%.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah. There's obviously a lot of valuable information in the report, and lots of those sort of themes we come to. I'm sure as we work through our conversation, I'd like another one of our guests, maybe Sean Robinson, who is the Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation, to perhaps introduce himself, because Sean, you must have dealt with these issues over the years, and perhaps you could give us a bit of a flavour of your experience and what your organisation does.
Yeah, look, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, and great to be following on from you, Karanina. Yeah, I mean, when I think about these issues of bullying, as I personally reflect, I realise that I have been bullied. I have been a bystander to bullying, and I've also been a perpetrator of bullying. And I think, yeah, that it's owning this collectively, and therefore owning the solutions collectively is really important. I think it's quite easy to other the whole thing and kind of think bullies are these nasty people off there somewhere in the corner. And I think the fundamental approach that we need to take to bullying elimination is a collective and cultural approach. So you know, there's actually quite a lot of research around bullying elimination that says sort of taking the solely intervention in instances when bullying occurs doesn't really work. And the reason for that is because the causes of bullying are not rooted in individuals, they're rooted in the sort of cultural social norms that allow bullying to happen. So why does racism happen? Because racism is acceptable within our society. And then if we let that be acceptable within our workplace, then we are creating the conditions for bullying and harassment. The same, why does sexual harassment occurs? Because sexual harassment is acceptable within our culture and our society. Same thing, and the same with bullying. And I think, so if you can, try to address those issues at a societal level, but as a manager or an owner of a business or someone within an organisation, those things are, can be hard to address. But what we can address as managers and workers in a workplace is we can address the culture of that workplace, even if it's down to the culture of your team or the people that you interact with, or if you're a manager or a leader, you can actively try to address the culture of the organisation you're in, and try to. It's a bit like gardening. You can plant your nice plants and hope the weeds won't grow up, and then you can go in and try and pluck out the weeds as much as you can, which is kind of the equivalent to trying to look for the instances of bullying and sort of uproot them. But if you've been a gardener, you'll know you'll never win that race. What you really need to do is plant so that the garden is so full of good things that bad, things we don't want, find it hard to create space. And that's what we need to do in workplaces. And so, I often find the definition of bullying, the official definitions of bullying, are a bit problematic because they focus on deliberate harm. So someone deliberately doing something in a repeated way to cause harm. And while that is obviously bullying, and that does happen, it's really on a continuum which includes lack of civility, awareness of the impact of our behaviour, and respect for one another. So if we've got a culture where there is lack of civility and respect and awareness of issues like racism, sexism, also simply poor management and poor interpersonal skills. So people not knowing how to support people to do things, or, as managers, we have to get our staff sometimes to do things that our staff don't want. But that takes a lot of skill to do it in a way that is not doing damage to people. So ultimately, the answer is a culture that is based on civility, on kindness, and on celebration of diversity, and respect and good communication. That's the answer.
Yes, thanks. I think there's some wonderful, lovely words there at the end for us to aspire to, both at societal level and in our organisations. And thanks for that sort of comprehensive sort of picture around your views on it, and a number of themes again coming up there that we'll return to. I wanted to use another one of our guests that's online, who's Victoria MacArthur, the CEO of Mates in Construction, which is sort of very much focused on a particular industry, and I guess in there, addressing the mental health challenges there. And Victoria, could you sort of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Mates in Construction does, particularly in relation to bullying and harassment?
No, great to be here and on a panel of such esteemed people. It's great to hear from you all, and thanks for inviting me along. So why are we here? So if you look at our industry, we have had significant problems across the industry with mental health and unfortunately losing too many people to suicide over quite a number of years. So in 2019, the construction industry decided that they were going to bring Mates in Construction into New Zealand. And we're here to support the workforce, to build the capability of the workforce to seek help and offer help. And the big key there is the offering of help, so being able to support one another in the workplace. So what we're hoping to do and what we're seeing is a big culture shift across our industry. So as Sean has rightly, sorry, I'm just picking something up, has rightly identified there, it's not about the individual, it's about a culture change. And we're looking at a whole of industry approach to suicide prevention, better mental health. if you look at some of the hazards across our industry, everybody knows the hazards that are associated with the construction industry. We work at heights. It's quite a dangerous place to work, but it's also a dangerous place to work for people within the industry, and that's around their well-being, their mental health. They work very, very long days. There's a lot of substance abuse, unfortunately, in the industry. And one of the biggest problems is bullying within our industry. So we see on site, it's quite acceptable. Some of the behaviours that we wouldn't normally see or we wouldn't want to see outside of a workplace will be quite normal within our construction industry. So over the period of time that we've been here, the 3 years that we've been here, we've undertaken lots of different pieces of research that I'll talk to today. But significantly as well, there has been research done into bullying within our industry amongst our young people, our young apprentices that are coming into the industry. We want to retain a great workforce, we want to grow a great workforce, but we know that bullying and harassment, especially for our under 24-year-olds, is significant. And the groups that are within that under 24-year-old cohort that are specifically being impacted are our young Maori men as well. We are losing far too many young Maori men nationally and within our industry to suicide. So today I'd like to talk about some of the things that are happening, and potentially from the conversations that we'll have together, some of the things that can be done to support these young people having thriving workplaces within a construction environment as well.
Thank you very much, Victoria. There's very powerful the work I think your organisation's doing and the information that you've given us around that. I have a final guest to introduce who's sitting next to me in the studio here, and that's Sarah Selwood, who comes, I think it would be fair to say, from a very practical perspective of working in the sort of HR, ER area around helping organisations and individuals when there are complaints of bullying and harassment, and how best to deal with those. So Sarah, perhaps you introduce yourself.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. So I'm an ER consultant and a licensed workplace investigator. I'm finding more and more that when companies have incidences or complaints of bullying and harassment occurring in the workplace, that they want independence in investigating those matters and to have somebody free from bias and completely impartial. So I've, I guess, observed the effects of bullying and harassment complaints on both the complainant and the respondent. I've seen firsthand how very damaging this can actually be, but it's also incumbent on me to run a very fair and balanced process in the way that I actually manage that. And I have to take a balance of probabilities approach in making my determinations about what I think has actually happened. One of the things that you said, Sean, that I think for me is fairly prevalent, you talked about being a bystander. And I see this over and over again where the behaviour has been fairly obvious to others in the workplace and everybody just stands back and does nothing about it. And in my view, that's becoming fairly unforgivable because of the damage that it's doing. So one of the first things that organisations can do is encourage a culture of speaking up. Cultural change takes time, and I know that some of you today will be looking for some practical steps about what you can do in the here and now if you have specific issues that you need to deal with in your organisation. My observations are that bullying is not always from managers down to their subordinates. I've seen very clear examples of employees disrespecting their managers and bullying upwards as well. So it's not always what you expect it to be. So hopefully what I bring to the conversation is some really practical hands-on experience in actually dealing with these issues as they arise in your workplace.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's very interesting, very practical sort of approach, and some hands-on experience, which I'm sure we'll be able to refer to as we go through this discussion. Look, what I thought I'd do is I can see questions coming in on Slido, and I noticed there's one that really picks up on something Sarah was just talking about there in terms of sort of the company culture. And the question specifically is what to do when bullying and harassment come from managers, and this is the company's culture. And I'd just like to get a bit of a view from people on that. And as Sarah alluded to, this did seem to be an area that you started to speak to, Sean. So maybe you could pick up on sort of answering this question and giving us some views first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, if a culture is almost always set from the top. So if there is a toxic culture within an organisation, and that is coming from the managers and leaders, then that is a very difficult situation for people to address. My advice would be that people should actually be looking to balance that power. So are you members of unions? What other ways can you? Because it's a very disempowering situation when the leaders of an organisation have power over you and are abusing that power and creating a negative culture. So yeah, and unfortunately what happens in many situations is people would rather leave those situations than try to take action. Unfortunately, in many situations, people can't afford to leave or feel like they have no power to leave. So in that situation, I think taking the formal action of laying complaints and making sure you have the support, whether it's of a union or other people in the organisation to do that. But that is very, very difficult. So, I do think there is a role for regulation and legislation and, trying to ensure that, and in fact, that already exists. So if you're a manager and you have a culture of bullying, you are at risk because you are breaching the health and safety legislation as it exists now. And, really the other regulatory thing is the policing of that. WorkSafe needs to really up their game on policing that. So, yeah, that's a very difficult situation. If you are a manager within that and there are other managers who are bullying, this is where I have found the definitions of bullying to be problematic, because I think we get really caught up in, can we prove that bullying actually happened here? Whereas actually what's obvious often is just very poor behaviour. And so, one thing I've learned over the years is to say, just act. Like next time I'm dealing with a situation where a manager or a leader in my organisation is behaving badly, I'm going to take action. I'm not going to focus on trying to have definitive evidence that this is bullying. I'm going to take action. So, yeah, I guess those are my thoughts. It's very difficult if you are a staff member and you have less power. Even when you have the support of senior management, sometimes it's too big a hurdle to actually make that complaint.
I'll pick up. I was going to pick up on that point as well, because obviously we talk about cultural change, the change of organisations. When they went about doing the research into our apprentices in particular in Australia, they took a cohort of 1,800 apprentices and they started to do both qual and quant research across that group. One of the things that I picked up on it that when they did one facet of that research was they looked at a group of apprentices that were going into the workplace and how they had dreams of change of the future and how they were going to approach the workforce. When they've revisited those young apprentices 9 months later, they found that they were starting to adopt the behaviours of what was happening on site rather than changing. They weren't going to go about the changes that they'd gone in to do. So if we haven't got the culture right, as Sean's saying, that can quite easily happen. People will decide to adopt poor behaviours in order to survive in a workplace. And if they see that's the culture of the workplace, then that's what they're going to follow. And they're not going to kind of stick their neck out and make that change. So the approach that Mates has taken across everything that we do, not just with our apprentices, is about building that collective voice. You talked about the unions and whether there's groups. The workforce can be a group regardless of the unions being there. So if we are working alongside, the way we operate at Mates, and I can only speak on behalf of our industry and how we operate, is that we work from the bottom up, and we work with everybody across a construction site. So 100% of the construction site, whether it be 5 men on the site or whether it be 2,000 workers on the site, will be trained in mental health and suicide prevention. And that not only gives them the skills and the capability in the space of mental health and identifying poor mental health or good mental health, what it does is it creates a team or a collective or a whānau, we call it the site whānau, the site community, so that they then have a common purpose of fostering this positive workplace environment that they want to work in. We have other programs that we then offer to give more skills in certain areas. But what we're doing is everybody is part of something, that becomes part of this group, and they all identify with that, which is quite strong when you're working in an environment, because then those that aren't adopting those good behaviours or tend to weed themselves out. So you'll find that the bullies potentially don't have a stronger voice in an environment where there is a collective of better behaviour or better knowledge around good mental health and better behaviours.
Oh, thank you very much, Victoria. It's very interesting. And I think in terms of Karenina, in terms of the research that you've got, obviously, you talked about specifically in terms of what was happening, but in terms of what organisations can do in terms of sort of shifting the culture when bullying and harassment comes from managers. What sort of recommendations or thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, well, it kind of, the top one kind of echoes what Sarah said, is people want someone independent, someone who doesn't have loyalty to either the alleged bully or the person who's making the complaint. Because if I think about the young people who've spoken to me who work in hospitality, where the bully happens to be the boss of the cafe, there is not a lot of distance between them and the perpetrator. And like you said, Sean, not everyone has the resources, or not just the material resources, but the emotional resources to raise a complaint. So there is a place, for places like WorkSafe, like MB, like the Human Rights Commission. But one of the issues there, we all have the right to access to justice, but the cost, in time and money to go through those processes, some of those things can drag on for a couple of years or 3 years or so. The reality of it is just it's unreal for some people. So we've got serious problems in terms of access to justice within the system. Certainly the definition of bullying it is inadequate. One of the things that we're lobbying the government to do is to consider ratifying International Labour Organization Convention 190, which provides a definition of violence and harassment, which includes not only physical but psychological, but also sexual and economic. It recognizes the economic cost and the harm on workers. So that's one of the things that we're lobbying government to address. But access to justice is a huge issue. But also we assume that the managers who are allegedly doing this understand that what they're doing is harmful. So at the ground level, we need to have some discussions about that. But for some businesses, you just have to go outside. And how do we support workers like a disabled worker, for example, who's taken 10 years to get a job? They can't just pack up and take their talent elsewhere. There's a huge gap in our system at the moment for really assisting the most vulnerable workers who take this forward.
Thank you very much. I think that leads very much to the sort of work that Sarah does in organisations. And you know, I'm interested, Sarah, around, you know, you must have cases where you go in and talk to an organisation, you think, well, maybe this is beyond the initial case that I'm talking to.
Yeah. Look, a couple of points out of that. I think you know, there was a comment there that we assume that the perpetrator of the bullying knows that they are bullying, and I'm yet to meet a bully in any of my investigations that wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going in there to get that person today. Most perpetrators of bullying, when a complaint is laid against them, will be absolutely floored and shocked by the allegations. So what this tells me is that we're not good at educating people in our workplaces about what bullying and harassing behaviour actually looks like. And so what we often end up with in these situations is two victims. We have a complainant that is potentially been very harmed by the behaviour that they've been exposed to, but we've now created a victim in our bully who is, if I uphold the allegations, is potentially going to lose their career. Certainly are facing potential dismissal in the workplace. So very traumatising for everybody concerned, and a big responsibility on the business to do the educational piece. And this doesn't have to be overly complex in terms of just starting to shift that dial a little bit. It is about having robust policies in place. It is about not just rolling out a policy, asking people to sign it and never even checking whether they've read it. It's the educational piece that we do around that to just create awareness about what's acceptable and what's not. One of the most common things I hear from a person who's been accused is, oh goodness me, it was just a bit of friendly banter, right? So in their mind, it's a joke. It's just humour. It's friendly banter. They don't realise they're crossing a line into offensive, confronting behaviour, and nobody's calling them out on it. And I despair when the first time someone is ever called out is when a formal complaint comes forward. What this tells me is the leadership are not identifying that they've got a problem. And to your earlier point, Sean, about being a bystander, we need to step in and deal with unacceptable behaviour before it reaches a point where somebody is very harmed and is at a point where they feel they have no other options but to raise a formal complaint. And just to the earlier point about access to justice and what have you, I am going to say to you that to check your employment agreements, it will have a complaints handling process in there. And if you raise a formal complaint, you are putting an obligation on your employer to actually do something about that. Now, whether it will be addressed and dealt with in a manner that's satisfactory to you remains to be seen, but there are avenues available to victims to say, if I raise this complaint in the correct way, I'm now placing an obligation on my employer to do something with it.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I mean, that leads to something I'd like to explore that came up on a question on Slido earlier, which was really around, so if people feel that they are being bullied or they're observing bullying in their organisation, you know, what is it that can be done to enable people to raise that issue? How do we, as it were, encourage people to raise this issue so that they can be appropriately addressed? So Victoria, what's your sort of view on that, about how we might do that?
Yeah, I was just listening to that because obviously in our industry it's quite fragmented. So you're talking about your employer, but your employer may not be the person that's bullying. So we're talking about a site culture here. So we're an industry where you know, you'll have multiple organisations working across a construction site, but whilst you're on that site, you still fall under the WorkSafe rules. So it's the site that is got, you know, their health and safety and psychological safety. It has to happen on that site. So if you're a subcontractor or a labourer on site and that you're feeling like you're being bullied on that site, what I would suggest they do, obviously the site supervisor is the person that is responsible ultimately for that site, but he could be the bully. So it's about finding somebody that you can get alongside, somebody that you can talk to, your mate on that site that you're able to talk to and go together to talk to somebody about it. It might, generally when somebody is under mental distress, and it can be, it could be because of the bullying behaviours that are going on, like Sean said, the bystanders that are standing around there, it's about them getting alongside the people and going together to actually address it, because quite often if you're victimised in that environment, you're not going to feel confident enough, especially if you're a labourer or a big construction site, to be able to take this up yourself. So it's about those bystanders that are sitting around, that are standing around, that we're building that collective action across, that we're building the capability of them to support each other, to actually support each other in this space. Sarah might have some views on that on a construction site as to how she's approached it in the past. I'd be interested to hear, but that's kind of, it's the same laws that apply, but you might not feel like when you're in that environment and you're working alongside lots of other organisations.
Thanks very much, Victoria. Karenina, I mean, in the figures you were giving us earlier, it seemed like there's some very specific groups, I think we can say, that are perhaps more likely to experience bullying in the workplace. What do you think could be done to perhaps encourage them to raise issues where they may feel, it's difficult for them to raise them? What would your advice be for organisations or the individuals in those circumstances?
It's really scary. If I think about young people, it's their first job, or something about some of our vulnerable workers, to whom, English might be a problem. You may have a contract, but understanding your rights within that contract is another thing. And people assume that because you have a contract that they will know, and then therefore feel empowered. So I think there's a lot of work in terms of, if you've got young workers or new workers or migrant workers, I've spoken to migrant workers who, perhaps where they've come from, certain things can happen. It's not against the law, and they think it's the same here. And so to tell them that they have rights is a whole new world. So, don't assume that your new workers understand their rights. Please make the time to go through the contract with them. A lot don't belong to unions. I have suggested to people, a union may be one body that can give you support if you're a worker. Those are some of the things that come through the studies and my engagements. In some large organizations, there are staff networks. For example, there are Māori or Pacific staff networks. And often that's where people will go for their refuge to talk to other colleagues. And like I said, the bystanders, often it won't be a surprise to some colleagues that the same person has treated them the same way. And that's one place where people can go and talk and seek support. The simple things that people don't know, that they have a right to take someone in when they go and talk to their supervisor or whoever it is to take the complaint. The simple things like that. Not everyone understands that they have that right to have that support person. So just quite simple things. But having a policy is one thing. Demonstrating from a leadership level that you will honor everybody there, regardless of what position they've got in the hierarchy, is really important. And perhaps think of ways that you can send that message that you all count, and that you have the same right to be said, regardless of status. For some of our workers, status is really important. You simply do not challenge power. So that's about culture competence. And if that's an element in your workplace that you think might benefit your relationship, your culture, then I would say seek some help around culture competence as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Karenina. That's interesting in terms of sort of that education piece, and again about particular groups that may be affected, and to think of that. Sean, I just want to start you off with a slightly different question, which is really, what can organisations do when what's happening in the organisation is managers are perhaps using bullying as a way to be successful in their organisation, to get their own way? What can be done when perhaps we start to observe that happening in our organisations?
Yeah, well, I think the antecedents of a lot of bullying, and as Sarah was saying, you know, I've upheld a complaint against somebody, and the investigator said this person was not aware that they were bullying, but they were bullying. You know, so a lot of bullying does occur kind of unconsciously. So how do you get around that? Training and proactively working stuff into the culture. So management training and communication training, you know, courageous conversation training across an organisation. So at times in an organisation, we have to have difficult conversations. And as Kiwis, we're useless at that generally. And so that's when bad behaviour often comes up, you know, and that can come up all over the show. But then also proactively starting to celebrate diversity. You know, if you want to look at an organisation that's done this well, go look at Spark. They have an organisational celebration of diversity. If you actually weave into how the organisation runs, that we love the fact that we've got Pacifica, we've got Māori, we've got women, we've got men, we've got young, we've got old, we've got non-binary, we've got, you know, and really celebrate that, then it's much harder to then get, you know, into, well, actually teasing somebody about that or bantering with someone about that, because actually we're on the front foot of celebrating that and saying it's awesome that we have this diversity in here. And then I also pick up on what Victoria said. I think if you're proactively leaning into mental health and well-being, then, you know, and that's often the safe door, I think, to open to this culture change. So we've actually, you know, we've got a toolkit on our website with the 5, you know, how do you apply the 5 ways to well-being in a workplace situation. And, you know, these are 5 kind of categories of behaviour that you know, have evidence behind them to show they improve your mental well-being. But a lot of them are interactions with other people. So one of them, for example, is connect. You know, so creating positive connection between people in a workplace, good for your mental health, but it's funny thing, it's also going to be really protective against bullying and bad behaviour. To give to one another, that's another of the 5 ways to well-being. Again, you know, you can start to see how these, if you proactively have programs to build these things into the culture of an organisation, you're making it much harder for bad behaviour to thrive. But it's an ongoing process. And again, I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the stick, and I think the stick does need to be there. I'm not arguing that you don't address individual situations of bullying or distress, or that you don't have complaint processes. You know, all of those things need to be in place, and all of that needs to happen. But if you proactively lean into this, creating a very positive culture, actually there's been lots of, the carrot for an employer is actually you get better staff productivity, you get better staff retention and satisfaction, you get better customer service, you get better teamwork between team members, you get faster and more efficient at things. And there's been multiple studies by, you know, independent organisations, Deloitte's, you know, people like that, that have showed that the bottom line benefit, if you invest $1 in promoting this stuff, you'll get a between $4 and $5 return on your bottom line. So, you know, apart from the fact that it's the right thing to do as a human being, it's the right thing to do as a business person, because you're going to make more money. So, you know, there are very practical ways you can grow this culture, and I think it has to be both and. You will never win the race of just trying to address each individual situation of bullying one at a time, and you won't get bystanders feeling like they can stand up and stay up unless you've created a culture where that's acceptable and okay. You know, I started to know that things were working just in our organisation when I got approached by our HR manager, and if someone has said that the way you're bantering with someone else might be microaggression, I thought that's awesome that someone feels okay to say that and that they know where they need to go to say it. And then I went and checked with the person in question, not the complainant, but the person I'd been sort of bantering around with. They said, no, you're fine. You know, it's all good. I took that in good humour. But yeah, the fact that we've managed to create a culture where people, you know, where a bystander can talk about that, and you know, we can have a really good communication about it with all the people involved. You know, that's where we need to get to, really.
Yeah,
and that's
and
that's
sorry, Sean.
Hey, I just we've got a few more questions here, and I noticed a lot of people nodding with what you were saying, Sean. So I think there's a lot of agreement around that sort of culture piece. But quite a few people are asking questions about the sort of process around raising complaints and the process that's followed and the sort of personal grievances. So, you know, in terms of those sort of questions, perhaps Sarah, in the first instance, could you give a sort of views on that?
I'm seeing a question here on Slido that says, if we don't have proof, can we end up with a personal grievance? And I think an important element that you need to understand with employment matters is that, unlike criminal matters, we don't need to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not our standard. So when I'm investigating workplace issues, we're using a balance of probabilities approach. So I'm looking at the evidence and I'm saying, which version of events seems more plausible? What have the witnesses said to me in terms of what they saw and heard? And I'm going to have to make a call for the company over what I think is most likely to have happened. So I think we need to get away from this idea that we have to prove things absolutely. The obligation on us as companies is, when these issues are raised, we have to investigate. We have to look into it. That's the obligation. Making a determination about what did and didn't happen can often be quite challenging, and that's where some companies might want to bring in some external expertise to help with that. But you can't sit back and go, we can't prove it, therefore we're going to do nothing with it, right? You have to say, we've had a complaint, we're going to look into it, and we're going to make some determinations about what we think is most likely to have happened. And if those determinations uphold a complaint, you then have to decide what action you're going to take from there. So is there a disciplinary process that follows? Is somebody likely to be dismissed? But do not shy away from an obligation to investigate when a complaint has been raised.
Okay, Sarah, so what you seem to be saying is that it's really important to make sure that you're investigating complaints when they're raised, perhaps encouraging people to make those, and recognising that the sort of burden of proof. I think I hear that balance of probabilities, thinking very much around that. There is a question that's come up which circles back to the idea of the person that's maybe the bully, or being alleged to be the bully, sort of lacking sort of self-awareness around that. And I'm interested, you know, Victoria, in, you know, your experience perhaps of coming across that in terms of perhaps employees that lack self-awareness, either as managers or as peers, and you know, however much somebody has perhaps talked to them about their behaviour, that it's not really resonating, that perhaps their behaviour is bullying. Have you sort of come across that, and what advice could you give to people around helping people be self-aware?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I've had a specific instance where I have come across it, but what I would say is, and in no way do I condone bad behaviours, but we have to look at everything that's happening in that workplace and where that's actually coming from. So again, if you look at construction, the timelines, the projects, the budgets, you know, are we on time? Are we going to finish this job? It can manifest in bad behaviour on site from a site supervisor trying to get the job done because of the amount of stress that they're being put under. So what we need to do, and I love what Sean was saying, because it's exactly how MEX operates. It's about building the capacity of the workforce, for this workforce to be able to support one another and have better awareness. They can actually talk to that supervisor around his behaviour as well. Now, is that behaviour a one-off? Is it something that it's just been happening for a couple of months? Is it something? How long has that behaviour been going on for? Because you don't know what that person is struggling with as well. So if we call out that behaviour, if the workforce or the individuals have the capacity and the capability to actually say, look, I've noticed this, and this about your mate recently. You know, you're going off all the time. This is going on for you. Is there something else going on for you? And we might be able to address it at that point. So that bullying behaviour, unless it's something that's deep-rooted, deep-set, and like I said, I don't condone bullying at all, it could be a manifestation of many things that are going on. And we may be able to get some support wrapped around that site supervisor or around that bully to be able to support them through whatever it is that's going on for them. So that's something that we look at quite closely when we're looking at behaviours. We're always talking about behavioural changes at mates, whether it's good or bad behavioural changes, and what is going on for the individuals. And that connector piece that, again, that Sean was referring to, that's exactly what we do at Mates. We create a group of people that know how to support people and know how to get them out to supports outside of their workplace. So again, with that person, whatever's going on for them, let's look at what's going on for them rather than saying, oh, you're a bully straight away. There might be some other stuff going on there as well.
Thank you, Victoria. And if I can sort of, I'm trying to sort of move through as many of the questions as we can. So I'll just direct this one, I think, perhaps to you, Karina, because it goes back to some of the figures that you gave at the beginning. And the person sort of asking, or the question is really around, given the numbers, are these kind of confirmed cases of bullying harassment, or are they perceptions of what bullying and harassment is? So, you know, could you speak a little bit about that? You know, confirmed and perception of bullying and harassment.
I mean, so these are self-reporting basically. So it's from staff themselves. They're not cases that have been through court and then, you know, whatever. So these are just ordinary workers, Kiwi workers. They've given a list of behaviours and sort of, you know, asked, have you experienced this and that. So in terms of bullying, we certainly didn't go in using the WorkSafe definition, like, you know, that has to be repeated. There were lists of international behaviours as an international test that Kantar used to sort of understand the prevalence of it. So so that's a quick answer to that, John.
Thank you very much. I think that's really helpful to sort of understand that. There's a question that actually names you, Sean, as specifically, and somebody's interested in terms of sort of taking quick action with managers versus a sort of full of investigation, sort of balancing legal process and employment law process with desired outcome. You know, what would be your advice for an organisation looking to navigate those various potential pitfalls?
Yeah, well, I think as an organisation, the organisation has to be prepared to take some risk, because I think at times organisations are terrified of PGs from anybody, from another manager, from a staff member. So, and they also do fall into, as Sarah was saying, that sort of burden of proof thing, that we must have enough evidence before we can act. And then what also happens is, because you often have a culture where, regardless, even if people know there's a policy, people won't lay a complaint because that they feel like that singles them out as a troublemaker. You know, it's going to be found out informally by other employers. So what I've learned over the years, and it often is the hard way, is if you know something bad's happening, and even if you can't put your finger on it, act. So I have at times sat down with a manager and said, your management style has to change, and it has to change today because it's not working. And these are some of the things that, you know, that need to change about it. Yeah, and I think in the future, if I saw bad behaviour and, let's say, taken that approach and that hadn't worked, I would probably go even further and potentially even initiate a complaint myself, or start looking into you know, inappropriate behaviour. But I think the onus is on the organisation to intervene you know, and it is a mixture of carrot and stick. So I think you can't be afraid of the stick. You have to be able to take action, but always in the context of what are our values? You know, what are we saying about how we celebrate diversity? What are we saying about racism, sexism, harassment as an organisation? And that, if you've set that tone, if you've proactively started that journey into the culture, then you've got grounds to kind of go, just your communication style is not actually in keeping with what's, you know, with our values as an organisation. And then you can start to take some more action. So the further you can take this into the sort of culture, into the interpersonal skills, into the respect zone, then the earlier you can intervene. The more you leave it to the something really bad has happened and now it needs to be a formal investigation, by the time you get to that stage, it's really difficult for everybody. So intervene early and intervene proactively to create something positive.
Very much, Sean. If I can sort of leave that as a sort of final word from you, because we've only got 3 minutes left. I just want everyone to just sort of have a sort of final say in relation to this, because I feel like there's a wealth of experience and knowledge in the virtual room and lots of facts and figures here. But I thought maybe if I could just ask perhaps Victoria in the first instance, sort of in sort of less than a minute, sort of a key thing that you feel you would sort of want as a recommendation.
Yeah, look, I mean, yeah, I've got heaps of research around me that I could give you, which I haven't today. But one thing that I would say, and I can, again, speaking from construction, we are a very complex industry, but we've done something very good in the way that the industry has approached this. So if you look at the way that the industry has embraced mental health and suicide prevention, which is going right across the whole spectrum of all of these issues, such as bullying and poor mental health on our sites, we're actually making change. And the organisations that are leading the way, you will see that all of these values that we're talking about, all of this stuff is being embedded into the culture that is being played out onto site. And we're starting to see the impact of that culture change. So, yeah, I want to celebrate the construction industry and what they're doing, because we are a diverse melting pot of individuals out there, but we have done some really good work. The organisations out there have done some really good work of actually bringing these people together and making them feel well supported and empowered and have a voice out there as well.
Thanks very much, Victoria. Karenina, a sort of final sort of statement from you, perhaps around, you know, given your research really led to us doing this, what would be a sort of quick final sort of statement around this from you?
Yeah, I support the call to act early, act sooner rather than leave later, because what we know is these behaviours are often not one-off. They can go on for years before someone actually lifts their hand up, you know, and trying to survive. So please act early. And don't assume your workers understand their rights based on your policies. And I support the need to ensure that everybody in the organizations has training on how to identify these behaviors and then how to support, especially the bystanders who are often in more empowered positions than those who can't speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd very much like that message about organisations having things in place to identify and support. Resonates with what we've heard from Victoria and Sean, I think particularly. What about for you, Sarah? So you don't have to pick up the pieces at the end with
look,
these.
I'm going to say face into this as companies. Don't do it for compliance reasons and to meet your legal obligations. Understand the benefits that you will achieve as a business if you proactively manage these things. You'll have better engagement, you'll have better productivity, it will deliver bottom line results. So be proactive, own it, face into it, don't shy away from it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that that positive message at the end about putting our best foot forward in relation to this. Obviously, I'd very much like to thank Victoria, Sean, and Karenina for joining today. Clearly, there was lots of information to get over to people, and I think you've all contributed fantastically to that. In terms of our follow-up from here, we will be sending out information to everyone that's attended today to help people to make contact with you directly and also to learn more of that research. But once again, really to finish off, I'd like to thank you all very much for that, allowing us to scratch the surface of a very important issue. And I thank you all very much for your time, those of you that have dialed in today to join this conversation.
Right, thank you.